It is currently the 1980s, and a group of devil worshippers is summoning a demon straight from hell. They are conducting this at night inside a secluded forest area. To summon a demon, a healthy adult has to be sacrificed, and they have successfully kidnapped one. The secluded area is a property of an old veteran named Bill who is visiting the grave of his dead wife. After giving his wife a fresh rose, he hears a noise emanating from somewhere. Upon looking at it, he sees the devil worshippers pushing their sacrificial man down to the pits of hell. They proceed to chant a foreign language that eventually summons a gray-colored demon. The leader of the devil worshippers, Joshua, tells the demon that he will be fed and cared for by the devil worshippers to give it strength and nourishment. After the demon walks away, Joshua cannot believe that the summoning has worked. Some days later, the small town of Hope Valley receives a new sheriff named Joe, who is still adjusting to the small town. He is greeted by a mechanic named Rick, who makes small talk with him. Joe tells Rick that he actually likes a quiet town, although he is still in the process of adapting. The sheriff then enters the police department, where he asks his two coworkers about some news regarding the town. But all they can report to him are mundane things, and Joe, who is a New Yorker, is unaccustomed to this. They even talk about rabies, vampires, and a movie only the sheriff knows. One of the police officers, Teddy, excuses himself from the police department. The other police officer, Liz, tells the sheriff that Teddy has a crush on someone. Right after this, the police officer heads to the local bar where he finds the beautiful lady bartender, Deanna, dancing and cleaning. Deanna asks him if he would like a coffee, and Teddy accepts. She then asks him about the new sheriff, and he describes him as quiet. Deanna thinks that this is because the sheriff is lonely, as he does not know anyone in the town. It is here that a citizen named Harry enters the premises. Harry tells the police officer that the sheriff has still not yet moved throughout the town, which is why some people view him as cold. With this in mind, Teddy then takes his leave. As he goes out, Harry urges Deanna to confess her love to the police officer already. When Teddy returns to the police station, the old veteran Bill has also just entered the station carrying a shotgun. He is there to issue a complaint regarding some trespassers on his property. Bill explains that the trespassers are covered in sheets, they have a guy with them, and they have summoned what he describes as a monstrous being which enters the body of the guy. Of course, Joe does not believe this and thinks the veteran is just mistaking some kids partying on his property. However, Bill tells him that no one in the town ever comes close to his property, and the sheriff does not know that because he is just new here. Just then, a dog owner named Bernard enters the police station and asks if anyone has seen his dog, Poncho. This leads to an argument between the dog owner and Bill because the veteran wants the dog to be on a leash. Right after this, Bernard leaves. Joe tells Bill that he will look up his complaint, and the veteran replies that he has already prepared the place for him. The veteran also warns the police officers that the phone lines might be down and that they need to rely on radio if they want to communicate with each other. After the veteran leaves, Liz notes that the old man is really a creepy fellow and that he has been seeing weird things lately. With this in mind, the sheriff heads out to the nearby local radio station. There, he asks the radio broadcaster, Georgia, if she has heard something strange in the channels. She replies that she has not heard anything and also advises the sheriff to take it easy because not all towns are bad. Meanwhile, Teddy is driving around in his police car to look for Bernard's dog. He is talking to Liz on the radio when he notices some blood on the road, alongside an abandoned bicycle that seems to belong to the local paperboy, Timmy. Teddy also sees the hooded men that Bill is talking about. When he turns around for a moment, the men have already disappeared. Finding this strange, Teddy immediately returns to his car and drives off. Meanwhile, a couple is making out inside their car when it suddenly shakes. The young man checks to see who or what is causing this vibration. A few moments later, the young man returns, but he is frantic, telling his girlfriend to open the car door. However, he gets pulled away by the gray demon in an instant. His girlfriend screams at the sight of the monster, wiping its bloody hand on the windshield. Later on, After eating flesh, the demon's horns emerge from its head, indicating that it has evolved. At the same time, the veteran Bill encounters 3 hooded men outside his property. He just laughs at them as he talks to his dead wife about their presence and silly appearance. The hooded men are each armed with a sharp weapon, but Bill is not scared of them because he has war experience. Bill tells them to come close to him, and one of the hooded men does so, only to step on a tripwire that triggers an explosion. Another hooded man attempts to approach from another side, which triggers another explosion. The final hooded man gets his foot stuck in a bear trap placed near Bill, who then uses his grenade to finish his enemy. Meanwhile, Joe is eating at the local diner. The owner of the diner, Mary, asks if he likes the food, and the sheriff replies that her burger is still the best. Just then, the waitress, Cindy, comes in late, but Mary does not mind. It seems that Cindy has not met the new sheriff yet. The waitress asks Joe what brought him here in this small town, and he answers that he just wants to get away from New Yorkers as a change of scenery. Not wanting to talk anymore, Joe pays for the meal and takes his leave. But as he is leaving, the policewoman Liz enters the diner and urgently tells the sheriff about loud noises coming from Bill's residence. When the sheriff leaves, the infatuated Cindy tries to cutely say goodbye to him, but immediately cringes at what she said. Because the matter is urgent, the sheriff ignores a man calling his name. After he leaves, the son of the radio broadcaster, Bobby, asks Rick the mechanic about the delivery of the timing belt. Rick calls for it on the phone, but the line suddenly goes dead. They discover that all the call lines throughout the town seem to be dead as well. They also try the landline at Georgia's office, finding it also non-functional. Georgia suddenly appears, scaring her son and Rick. Then they discuss over the dead telephone lines, and Georgia is thinking if it has something to do with the sheriff's inquiry earlier. The radio broadcaster opens the radio where they overhear Joe's radio conversation with Teddy, who is returning to town. For this reason, the curious 3 confront the policeman, asking what is really going on using the radio. Teddy tells them while he is looking out for the missing dog, he sees Timmy's bike beside a pool of blood. He wants to make a phone call to Timmy's parents, but it cannot be done for now. The policeman then thinks that this must be connected to the incident with Bill, because Liz and the sheriff are heading there as they speak. Meanwhile, Joe and Liz arrive at Bill's property. He sees the veteran's boots covered in blood, as well as a landmine on the ground. Upon seeing his abandoned wheelchair slumped over, Joe turns back to Liz. However, behind the policewoman is the horned demon, who immediately squeezes her poor head. Joe is slightly shocked by this, but he quickly fires his gun toward the demon. His fate is unknown. That night, Teddy tries his best to contact his fellow police officers, but no response ever returns. The townsfolk are hopeful that Joe and Liz are just probably talking to the veteran about the explosions. But Rick the mechanic thinks there is something truly wrong, especially because the sheriff is a smart, skeptical man that came from the big city. Still, Teddy is hopeful that his fellow police officers will return unscathed. As such, he will go around the town to observe and protect. He will also check on the dog owner, Bernard, to prevent him from searching for his dog. Others have also chosen to help in their own way. Rick has decided to head to Bill's property and check what happened. Georgia heads to the radio station and listens for anything suspicious on the radio. Bobby will check on other townspeople and fill them up on what is occurring. But they are not the only ones moving, as the hooded men have also decided to make a move. Teddy then catches Rick still standing in front of his car. At the same time, both of them say to each other that their car batteries are gone. Rick theorizes that all of the cars in the vicinity are probably without batteries. This means that someone does not want them to leave Hope Valley. He also has no spare batteries in store, and they have to wait for the telephone lines to come back. Of course, Teddy does not want to wait that long with all the weird things happening around them. Meanwhile, Deanna is taking out the trash when she encounters the hooded men. Having no idea who they are, she tries to ask them about their business with her. The hooded man in front of her makes his intention clear when he takes out a knife, prompting the frightened woman to scream for help. Teddy hears this and comes running, leaving Rick behind. The policeman arrives just in time to kill the hooded man who is about to kill Deanna. Another enemy attacks Teddy and manages to remove his gun, but Deanna comes back with a shovel and repeatedly assaults the enemy with it, so much so that the policeman has to stop her from continuing further. However, another wave of hooded men arrives at the scene. It is here that Harry comes to the two's rescue, telling them to leave it to him and close the door immediately. Despite his heroic act, the enemies easily and swiftly kill the courageous man. Meanwhile, Rick has just searched for his gun when he hears a sound from outside his repair shop. Slowly but surely, the mechanic goes outside to check and secure the place. A hooded man suddenly attacks him from behind, but he easily kills him with 2 gunshots. He carefully approaches the one he had just killed when another one runs behind him, making him shoot. Another much taller hooded person then appears. Perhaps wanting to have a man-to-man fight with the enemy, Rick decides to use his trusty crowbar instead as his melee weapon. However, when another hooded person appears, Rick sacrifices himself by shooting at the nearby gas tanks. The explosion is large enough to take the enemies out. The loud sound of it is heard by the other townspeople near the area. For this reason, Teddy is determined to go back to the police station to fulfill his duty to serve and protect. Deanna and Bobby are understandably apprehensive at the idea because going back out is almost a sure way to die. But the policeman insists because it is just close by and there are more weapons stored inside. Here, Deanna finds and hands over a baseball bat to Teddy so he can at least arm himself in his dangerous quest. With a baseball bat in hand, Teddy promises to communicate via the local radio once he gets back to the police station. However, Bobby notices that someone is moving from the smoky repair shop, which turns out to be Rick. After surviving the explosion, Rick shouts for Bernard's name because he just lives nearby. But while he is limply walking toward Bernard's house, the demon takes him by the head and kills him. At the same time, inside Mary's diner, a hooded man with an axe appears behind the old lady and quickly slices her. The grisly sight causes Cindy to scream at the top of her lungs. She manages to run away from the enemy, but falls on the ground. As the hooded man approaches the terrified waitress, the fierce radio broadcaster Georgia rescues her by firing a shotgun at the enemy. She quickly takes Cindy with her, and both of them run to where Teddy and the others are staying. Upon entering, Georgia asks Rick's whereabouts, but Cindy answers that the mechanic is dead. With all of this happening, George asks what is going on, adding that she picks up nothing from the radio, not even from the sheriff or Liz. Bobby proposes that they should call somebody, but she tells them that the best they can do at the moment is to broadcast what is happening and hopes that somebody is driving nearby. Although Teddy thinks this is a long shot, he agrees. At this point, Georgia is already infuriated by what is happening. Cindy is skeptical if the policeman can return to the police station safely, confessing that she saw an inhuman being that forcefully took Rick. It is now clear to them that they are dealing with something otherworldly and supernatural. Still, the policeman insists that he must come back to the police station because it is his job. He then asks Deanna to bring out her one-way radio, which they will use to communicate with his walkie-talkie. However, since it is a one-way radio, only Teddy can communicate with them, but they cannot respond to him. The policeman promises that if he comes back with the guns and ammo, he will make sure that they will all survive. But before he can get out, Georgia spots something strange outside, prompting the others to look as well. They see a hooded man dragging his deceased ally into the forest. Bobby thinks that they are feeding something behind the trees. While all of them are distracted, the undeterred policeman decides to go out to the back of the store to leave them undisturbed. It is already too late when Deanna notices that Teddy has gone away. Outside, Teddy carefully walks through the dark streets. He quickly encounters a hooded man armed with a crowbar. A melee battle ensues, with Teddy becoming outnumbered when another enemy emerges. Although he manages to fend them off for a bit, the enemies are still too much for the policeman. Just as he is about to be hit by a baseball bat, he is rescued by Joe, who suddenly appears with his face all covered in blood. Armed with a shotgun, the sheriff immediately orders Teddy to go inside the police station. After getting inside, they block the door with a table to prevent intrusion. Teddy cannot help but exclaim that Joe is miraculously still alive. When he asks the sheriff where Liz is, Joe silently shakes his head, indicating that she has died. He asks Joe what is happening with the town, who answers that a man-eating demon has been summoned from the depths of hell. Teddy then continues to ask if Joe has seen the demon and how he got away from the monstrous being. It turns out that Joe used Bill's claymore mine to blow the demon. Hearing this, Teddy remembers that they have an explosive device in the evidence locker. It has been there since last year when the sheriff before Joe confiscated it from Bill. He tells Joe to open the evidence locker, who cannot believe his eyes. Upon learning that there are still other survivors, Joe instructs Teddy to make sure they survive. To do this, Teddy will lure the hooded men away from the area while Joe will detonate the bomb on the monster. With this instruction, Teddy communicates back to Deanna and the others about Joe still being alive. While he is telling them to prepare the entrance for their arrival, Bobby gets stabbed by the enemies through the narrow crack in the door. The wounded Bobby immediately calls for help, and the three women quickly lay him down on the pool table. Cindy and Deanna press the bandage on Bobby's wound to stop the bleeding, while Georgia is comforting his hurt son. However, despite their collective efforts, Bobby still dies from his wound. Meanwhile, Teddy is already back out in the streets to fight the hooded men. Despite having a shotgun and a revolver, the policeman is still wounded by the enemies. Fortunately, he is right at the door of the store where Georgia and others let him in. There, he is informed that Bobby has died a few minutes ago. Even though it is not anyone's fault, Teddy cannot help but apologize for what happened. He then remembers that Joe is still out there. Outside, Joe launches an explosive attack against the hooded men using a gun that has exploding bullets. After doing so, he fights an enemy armed with a sledgehammer. Driven by adrenaline, the sheriff manages to defeat his hooded foe. He gets his gun again and reloads another explosive cartridge at it. He puts it back down after seeing a chainsaw on the ground. Now armed with a chainsaw, the sheriff carefully approaches Bernard's tree garden. Like a game of cat and mouse, Joe slices through the trees in hopes of hitting the horned demon. Finally, after a while of cutting, the demon has decided to show itself. As such, Joe steps back to pick up the gun and shoots it toward the monster, causing a huge explosion. After the smoke has cleared, Deanna, Cindy, and Teddy head out of their hiding place to ask if the demon is finally defeated. With the monster's death confirmed, Joe tells them that they should head to the next town, and the others agree. While slowly making their way there, Joe jokingly asks with weariness if they can take the subway. Afterward, in another town known as Ingram, a man is eating while listening to the radio about what happened to Hope Valley. A waitress comments that there seems to be a lot of actions happening in the nearby town, but the man says that nobody cares for small towns like theirs. The waitress then moves to another customer. However, the customer turns out to be Joshua, the leader of the devil worshippers, now looking for another town to victimize. The movie is noticeably made with a low budget due to some cheap use of practical and visual effects. Aside from this, the story is also predictable and the cast of characters is unremarkable. Nevertheless, it is still a good thriller movie to watch with friends. It is clearly an homage to the older horror movies whose emphasis is on the monsters, which is evident in it being set in the 80s. Overall, despite the abundance of things to criticize, the movie is entertaining.